how's it going? Happy Equinox. It is September the 22nd, 2025, which means it is the Autumn Equinox. Actually, it was at 11:19 a.m. today, Pacific Standard Time, and we just wrapped up our Equinox working 2025. So I wanted to extend another thank you to everyone who participated in that. We had an incredible time, a very profound time. It was both I and Temple presenting, and the people that joined were sweet, open, wonderful, incredible people. Some of them are on the chat here, and it was wonderful. So today, we're going to continue on the equinox theme, and we're going to talk about St. John of the Cross and his classic text, The Dark Night of the Soul, which is one of the most important texts of world spirituality and certainly of Christian mysticism. And I have chosen it for today, not just because of the general atmosphere in the world at the moment, but also because it's the equinox. And the equinox is the moment where light and dark are perfectly balanced in the world. And so we're going to be focusing on the darkness for today and how to balance it with the light, which is very much the topic of St. John of the Cross's Dark Night of the Soul. So before we get started, like and subscribe. More important now than ever. Join us on the Discord, and please consider becoming a supporter of the channel. You can do that by hitting the join button below. Why becoming a channel? Why liking the channel is subscribe, and then being a paid member is join? I'll never understand. But consider becoming a paid supporter. It really, really helps and allows us to continue doing these streams and do things like I just bought a new stream deck to control this instead of just OBS, which is pretty awesome so far. So, with that said, who was St. John of the Cross? Before we jump into the text, let me tell you a little bit about St. John. I'm just going to give you the boilerplate before we get into the text. Christian mysticism, you might say, yeah, why wouldn't I do Christian mysticism? We're going to do Hinduism and Buddhism because they're cool and trendy, but not Christianity? No, I don't think so. Obviously, some of the most important mystical texts in world history, let alone mystical traditions, are from the Christian tradition. Some of them are banned within the Christian tradition. Not this one, but I'm thinking of like Miguel de Molinos and people like that. But John of the Cross was tell you what, I'm just going to give you the boilerplate. The boilerplate so we can just get straight into it. Okay. All right. So he was born Juan de Yepes, Y-E-P-E-S, maybe Spanish speakers can help me on that, at Fonteveros, Spain, to a poor family. His father died early, and he grew up in hardship. He was a Carmelite monk and later helped none other than the great mystic, one of the great mystics in world history, not just Christianity, Saint Teresa of Avila, to reform the Carmelite order. He was also kidnapped and imprisoned, get this, by rival Carmelite monks. They got gangs and that shit for 9 months and was beaten and nearly starved to death, during which time he composed this text, The Dark Night of the Soul, which is about a purifying experience where the soul is stripped of attachments, senses, and even the comfort of felt divine presence. He describes a twofold journey: active night, in which the soul consciously detaches from worldly desires through ascetic practice, and passive night, in which God acts directly, withdrawing consolations to purify deeper subconscious attachments, leading to union with the divine. This is not depression or despair. Rather, it is a transformative emptiness that clears the way for a direct, loving union with God. So we have now recognized this experience as a not just normal but actually essential and critical stage along the spiritual path, in which one has built up their faith to an incredible level, and then all of a sudden it's gone. This may have occurred to you after a period of maybe many years spent researching mysticism, studying, practicing, meditating. It happens a little faster with entheogen use, but where you've given it your all, and then all of a sudden you just can't be bothered anymore. All of a sudden you get a state of spiritual dryness, meaning it just doesn't give you, you plateau. It just doesn't give you the same feelings that it used to. The grace doesn't come anymore. You enter a despair. This isn't just depression. It's not just a bad mood. It's when you actually feel that God has withdrawn his presence. And this experience is like, well, I did everything right. What the hell? Like, why all of a sudden I'm thrown into all of a sudden no one's answering. And again, this is normal. It's a test of faith and a test of one's progress. Can one continue to do the action even if you're not getting cookies as a reward? That's the elevator pitch on it. With that, let's jump straight into the reading. I picked out, obviously we're not going to do the whole book. We're just going to keep this to an hour. But I picked out some important and critical sections, some critical and important sections from the book that meet with today's theme of the autumn equinox. Let's get straight into it. Meeting and integrating spiritual darkness. So these are selected excerpts. All right. Let's begin with the stanzas of the soul, which is the opening poem that he reads. And we'll return to it at the end, perhaps with a new understanding, so make sure to hang in there for the end. On a dark night, kindled in love with yearnings, O happy chance, I went forth without being observed, my house being now at rest. In darkness and secure, by the secret ladder, disguised, O happy chance, in darkness and in concealment, my house being now at rest. In the happy night in secret, when none saw me, nor I beheld aught, without light or guide, save that which burned in my heart. This light guided me more surely than the light of noonday, to the place where he, who I knew who, was awaiting me, a place where none appeared. O night that guided me, O night more lovely than the dawn, O night that joined beloved with lover, lover transformed in the beloved, upon my flowery breast, kept holy for himself alone. There he stayed sleeping, and I caressed him, and the fanning of the cedars made a breeze. The breeze blew from the turret. As I parted his locks with his gentle hand, he wounded my neck, and caused all my senses to be suspended. I remained lost in oblivion. My face I reclined on the beloved. All ceased, and I abandoned myself, leaving my cares forgotten among the lilies. There's our opening poem. Book 1, Chapter 1. Into this dark night souls begin to enter when God draws them forth from the state of beginners, which is the state of those that meditate on the spiritual road, and begins to set them in the state of progressives, which is that of those who are already contemplatives, to the end that, after passing through it, they may arrive at the state of the perfect, which is that of the divine union of the soul with God. Wherefore, to the end that we may the better understand and explain what night is, through which the soul passes, and for what cause God sets it therein, it will be well here to touch first of all upon certain characteristics of beginners, in order that, realizing the weakness of the state wherein they are, they may take courage and may desire that God will bring them into this night, wherein the soul is strengthened and confirmed in the virtues, and made ready for the inestimable delights of the love of God. It must be known, then, that the soul, after it has been definitely converted to the service of God, is, as a rule, spiritually nurtured and caressed by God, even as is the tender child by its loving mother, who warms it with the heat of her bosom and nurtures it with sweet milk and soft and pleasant food, and carries it and caresses it in her arms. But as the child grows bigger, the mother gradually ceases caressing it, and hiding her tender love, puts bitter aloes upon her sweet breast, sets down the child from her arms, and makes it walk upon its feet, so that it may lose the habits of a child and betake itself to more important and substantial occupations. The loving mother is like the grace of God, for as soon as the soul is regenerated by its new warmth and fervor for the service of God, he treats it in the same way. He makes it to find spiritual milk, sweet and delectable, in all the things of God, without any labor of its own, and also great pleasure in spiritual exercises, for here God is giving to it the breast of his tender love, even as to a tender child. Meaning, just like when you're a child and you get lots of attention when you're young, but then must learn to walk on your own, so is it with God. Book 1, Chapter 9. Of the signs by which it will be known that the spiritual person is walking along the way of this night, and purging of senses. But since these aridities might frequently proceed not from the night and purgation of the sensual desires aforementioned, but from sins and imperfections, or from weakness and lukewarmness, or from some bad humor or indisposition of the body, I shall here set down certain signs by which it may be known if such aridity proceeds from the aforementioned purgation, or if it arises from any of the aforementioned sins. For the making of this distinction, I find that there are 3 principal signs. The first is whether, when a soul finds no pleasure or consolation in the things of God, it also fails to find it in anything created. For as God sets the soul in this dark night, to the end that he may quench and purge its sensual desire, he allows it not to find attraction or sweetness in anything whatsoever. In such a case, it may be considered very probable that this aridity and insipidity proceed not from recently committed sins or imperfections. For if this were so, the soul would feel in its nature some inclination or desire to taste other things than those of God. The second sign, whereby a man may believe himself to be experiencing the said purgation, is that the memory is ordinarily centered upon God, with painful care and solicitude, thinking that it is not serving God, but is backsliding, because it finds itself without sweetness in the things of God. And in such a case, it is evident that this lack of sweetness and this aridity come not from weakness and lukewarmness, for it is the nature of lukewarmness not to care greatly or to have any inward solicitude for the things of God. There is thus a great difference between aridity and lukewarmness, for lukewarmness consists in great weakness and remissness in the will and in spirit, without solicitude as to serving God, whereas purgative aridity is ordinarily accompanied by solicitude, with care and grief, as I say, because the soul is not serving God. For the cause of this aridity is that God transfers to the spirit the good things and the strength of the senses, which, since the soul's natural strength and senses are incapable of using them, remain barren, dry, and empty. For the sensual part of a man has no capacity for that which is pure spirit. And thus, when it is the spirit that receives the pleasure, the flesh is left without savor and is too weak to perform any action. But the spirit, which all the time is being fed, goes forward in strength, and with more alertness and solicitude than before, in its anxiety not to fail God. The third sign whereby this purgation of sense may be recognized is that the soul can no longer meditate or reflect in the imaginative sphere of sense as it was wont, however much it may of itself endeavor to do so. For God now begins to communicate himself to it, no longer through sense as he did aforetime, by means of reflections which joined and sundered its knowledge, but by pure spirit, into which consecutive reflections enter not. But he communicates himself to it by an act of simple contemplation, to which neither the exterior nor the interior senses of the lower part of the soul can attain. Book 1, Chapter 10, of the way in which these souls are to conduct themselves in this dark night. During the time, then, of the aridities of this night of sense, wherein God effects the change of which we have spoken above, drawing forth the soul from the life of sense into that of the spirit, that is, from meditation to contemplation, wherein it no longer has any power to work or to reason with its faculties concerning the things of God, as has been said. Spiritual persons suffer great trials, by reason not so much of the aridities which they suffer, as of the fear which they have of being lost on the road, thinking that all spiritual blessing is over for them, and that God has abandoned them, since they find no help or pleasure in good things. It is well for those who find themselves in this condition to take comfort, to persevere in patience, and to be in no wise afflicted. Let them trust in God, who abandons not those that seek him with a simple and right heart, and will not fail to give them what is needful for the road, until he bring them into the clear and pure light of love. The way in which they are to conduct themselves in this night of sense is to devote themselves not at all to reasoning and meditation, since this is not the time for it, but to allow the soul to remain in peace and quietness, although it may seem clear to them that they are doing nothing and are wasting their time, and although it may appear to them that it is because of their weakness that they have no desire in that state to think of anything. The truth is that they will be doing quite sufficient if they have patience and persevere in prayer without making any effort. What they must do is merely to leave the soul free and disencumbered and at rest from all knowledge and thought, troubling not themselves in that state about what they shall think or meditate upon, but contenting themselves with merely a peaceful and loving attentiveness toward God, and in being without anxiety, without the ability, and without desire to have experience of him or to perceive him. Now, of the benefits which this night causes in the soul. This night and purgation of the desire, a happy one for the soul, works in it so many blessings and benefits, although to the soul, as we have said, it rather seems that blessings are being taken away from it. That even as Abraham made a great feast when he weaned his son Isaac, even so is there joy in heaven, because God is now taking the soul from its swaddling clothes, setting it down from his arms, making it to walk upon its feet, and likewise taking from it the milk of the breast and the soft and sweet food proper to children, and making it to eat bread with crust, and to begin to enjoy the food of robust persons. This food and these aridities and this darkness of sense is now given to the spirit, which is dry and emptied of all the sweetness of sense, and this food is the infused contemplation whereof we have spoken. This is the first and principal benefit caused by this arid and dark night of contemplation, the knowledge of oneself and of one's misery. For besides the fact that all the favors which God grants to the soul are habitually granted to them, enwrapped in this knowledge, these aridities and this emptiness of the faculties, compared with the abundance which the soul experienced aforetime and the difficulty which it finds in good works, make it recognize its own lowliness and misery, which in the time of its prosperity it was unable to see. The second benefit which the soul derives from these aridities is that it serves God with greater purity of love, for it is no longer moved to serve him by the pleasure and delight which it finds in spiritual things, since it finds no such pleasure in them, but only by God alone, so that it serves God purely for God's sake, which is pure love. Understanding the sacred darkness. Let us begin to explain how this dark contemplation is not only night for the soul, but is also grief and torment. The dark night is By the way, what is the point? Why? Why am I reading this? So what? Really clear. Moments of despair, depression, and feeling that all is lost are normal on the spiritual path. So whether you've already experienced them, may experience them in the future, or are experiencing them right now, if you take one thing away, it is moments of darkness, despair, feeling lost, and feeling disconnected from the divine. These are normal. Push through. Push through. They're a test. This dark night is an inflowing of God into the soul, which purges it from its ignorances and imperfections, habitual, natural, and spiritual, and which is called by contemplatives infused contemplation, or mystical theology. Herein God secretly teaches the soul and instructs it in perfection of love, without it doing anything, or understanding of what manner is this infused contemplation. Inasmuch as it is the loving wisdom of God, God produces striking effects in the soul. For by purging and illumining it, he prepares it for the union of love with God. Wherefore, the same loving wisdom that purges the blessed spirits and enlightens them is that which here purges the soul and illumines it. But the question arises, why is the divine light, which, as we say, illumines and purges the soul from its ignorances, here called, by the soul, a dark night? To this the answer is that for two reasons. This divine wisdom is not only night and darkness for the soul, but is likewise affliction and torment. The first is because of the height of divine wisdom, which transcends the talent of the soul, and in this way is darkness to it. The second, because of its vileness and impurity, in which respect it is painful and afflictive to it, and is also dark. In order to prove the first point, we must here assume a certain doctrine of the philosopher, which says that the clearer and more manifest are divine things in themselves, the darker and more hidden are they to the soul naturally. Just as the clearer is the light, the more it blinds and darkens the pupil of the owl. And the more directly we look at the sun, the greater is the darkness which it causes in our visual faculty, overcoming and overwhelming it through its own weakness. In the same way, when this divine light of contemplation assails the soul which is not yet wholly enlightened, it causes spiritual darkness in it. For not only does it overcome it, but likewise it overwhelms it and darkens the act of its natural intelligence. For this reason, Saint Dionysius and other mystical theologians call this infused contemplation a ray of darkness. That is to say, for the soul that is not enlightened and purged, for the natural strength of the intellect is transcended and overwhelmed by its great supernatural light. So next time you meet a light worker, or somebody who tells you to think positive thoughts only, man, and everything else is dark, and that you shouldn't be dark, let them know that no less than St. John of the Cross says that God himself sends a ray of darkness into those who are true contemplatives. Or as the late Andrew Chumbley put it, he who shines with the greatest light shall cast the darkest shadow. Wherefore David likewise said, that near to God and round about him are darkness and cloud, not that this is so in fact, but that it is so to our weak understanding, which is blinded and darkened by so vast a light to which it cannot attain. For this cause the same David then explained himself, saying, through the great splendor of his presence past clouds, that is, between God and our understanding. And it is for this cause that when God sends it out from himself to the soul that is not yet transformed, this illumining ray of his secret wisdom causes thick darkness in the understanding. Understanding is Bina, the great sea, Babylon, the dark mother. People have told me I'm dark and evil all my life. Book 2, Chapter 7. We continue the same matter and consider other afflictions and constraints of the will. The second way in which the soul suffers pain is by reason of its weakness, natural, moral, and spiritual. For when this divine contemplation assails the soul with a certain force, in order to strengthen it and subdue it, it suffers such pain in its weakness that it nearly swoons away. This is especially so at certain times when it is assailed with somewhat greater force. For sense and spirit, as if beneath some immense and dark load, are in such great pain and agony that the soul would find advantage and relief in death. Beneath the power of this oppression and weight, the soul feels itself so far from being favored that it thinks, and correctly so, that even that wherein it was wont to find some help has vanished with everything else, and that there is none who has pity upon it. A thing of great wonder and pity is it that the soul's weakness and impurity should now be so great that though the hand of God is of itself so light and gentle, the soul should now feel it to be so heavy and so contrary, though it neither weighs it down nor rests upon it, but only touches it, and that mercifully, since He does this in order to grant the soul favors and not to chastise it. The third kind of suffering and pain that the soul endures in this state results from the fact that two other extremes meet here in one, namely the divine and the human. The divine is this purgative contemplation, and the human is the subject, that is, the soul. The divine assails the soul in order to renew it, and thus to make it divine, and stripping it of the habitual affections and attachments of the old man, to which it is very closely united, knit together and conformed, destroys and consumes its spiritual substance, and absorbs it in deep and profound darkness. As a result of this, the soul feels itself to be perishing and melting away in the presence and sight of its miseries, in a cruel spiritual death, even as if it had been swallowed by a beast and felt itself being devoured in the darkness of its belly, suffering such anguish as was endured by Jonas in the belly of that beast of the sea. For in this sepulchre of dark death it must needs abide until the spiritual resurrection which it hopes for. Now, how, although this night brings darkness to the spirit, it does so in order to illumine it and give it light. The darkness which this night causes in the spirit is only to illumine it concerning all things. And the humility which it causes is only to exalt it, and the poverty to which it reduces it is only that it may abound. And the emptying of all the apprehensions concerning creatures to which it subjects, it is only that it may have its simple and pure comprehension fixed and centered upon God. And the reason for this is that the soul cannot be fit for divine union until it be purged from all that which is contrary to God. For this cause, all that is contrary to God must be driven away, and the soul must be stripped of it, in order that, being cleansed and pure, it may be fit for this union. Wherefore this dark night of loving fire, as it purges in the darkness, so likewise in the darkness enkindles the soul. And just as fire material, when it has kindled wood, first attacks it by drying it and casting out its moisture and making it black and dark and unsightly, and even causing it to emit a bad odor, and as it dries it little by little brings out and drives away all the dark and unsightly accidents which are contrary to the nature of fire. And then, as time passes, it begins to kindle it externally and give it heat, and finally transforms it into itself and makes it as beautiful as fire. So in this enkindling of love, we must understand that it is this same fire of love which afterwards becomes united with the soul and glorifies it, that aforetime assailed it in order to purge it, even as the fire that permeates the log of wood is the same that first of all attacked and wounded it with its flame, drying it and stripping it of its unsightly qualities, until by means of its heat it had prepared it to such a degree that it could enter it and transform it into itself. Now let's talk about integration and transformation, a theme which will be very topical for those of us who were with us for the Equinox course. Of other delectable effects which are wrought in the soul by this dark night of contemplation. Although the blessings that this night causes in the soul cannot come to be perfectly enjoyed until it is ended, for they will then be revealed clearly, yet even now that it is passing, the soul can perceive them in some way, for it feels that its love toward God is being purified and strengthened. It sees that all the appetites and affections of sense are being gradually mortified. It observes that from day to day it is acquiring greater knowledge of God, though this knowledge comes to it in darkness. The soul finds, too, that it is being gradually freed from many imperfections and defects, both natural and spiritual, into which it used to fall easily when it served God in the way of sense. These defects now being purged away by this spiritual purgation, the soul can perceive the improvement which God is working in it, although all this comes to it in the midst of darkness and aridity. For in this dark contemplation, God is secretly and quietly producing in the soul humility, patience, fortitude against temptations, and many other virtues, though the soul is not conscious of acquiring them. All this resembles what happens to one who is learning. What he is being taught is being impressed upon him imperceptibly, and he is not conscious of the gradual progress that he is making. And the greatest benefit that this dark night brings to the soul, which, though the soul perceive it not, is being communicated to it abundantly, is that God is now weaning it completely from self-seeking in spiritual things. This is true even of the magical path, especially of the magical path. Let me read that again. And the greatest benefit that this dark night brings to the soul, which though the soul perceive it not, is being communicated to it abundantly, is that God is now weaning it completely from self-seeking in spiritual things, and is purifying its love, so that it may not serve him for the pleasure and consolation that it finds in so doing, but purely for his own sake, his capital H, purely for God's own sake. Initiation is a real phenomenon. It does not change across the ages. It is not conducted by humans. And you know it when you see it. Now let us explain how, though in darkness, the soul walks securely. The reason why the soul walks securely in this darkness is because it is suffering. For the path of suffering is more secure and profitable than that of joy and action. First, because suffering gives strength, whereas joy commonly weakens and destroys. Second, because in suffering the soul is drawing nearer to God, who in himself is inaccessible, and is withdrawing farther from all that is not God, which is the creature, meaning the animal self. And the farther the soul journeys from sensual and temporal things, the nearer it approaches to God, who is supreme in his being. And the more it approaches God, the darker it becomes to itself, since the light of God infinitely transcends natural light. The Thelemites will recognize bits of Liber LXV here. There is a light beyond light. Therefore David says, darkness was under his feet. The soul also walks securely in this dark night because it is traveling by a way wherein sense cannot interfere, for sense, being blind in matters that are spiritual, cannot lead the soul astray when the soul is being guided by faith alone, which is above sense. Furthermore, the soul walks securely because it is traveling by the way of suffering and distress. This road is more secure than that of pleasure, because suffering brings with it clarity and caution, while pleasure commonly blinds and bewilders, and also because he who suffers is led by the hand of God more surely than he who enjoys, for suffering teaches self-knowledge, while enjoyment dissipates the soul and scatters it. Yes, and we live in a more dissipated world than ever. Suffering teaches self-knowledge, while enjoyment dissipates the soul and scatters it. Now, here's some select passages on emerging transformed. You might want to go back and read the whole book, but these are key bits. On the 8th step of love, the soul takes the beloved without effort and finds him easily. Him, capital H, beloved, capital B. On the 8th step of love, the soul takes the beloved without effort and finds him easily. This step belongs to the state wherein the soul enjoys habitual sweetness in God, without the great intensity of yearning which it had before. Upon this step, the soul says, I found him whom my soul loveth. I held him and would not let him go. The 9th step of love causes the soul to burn with sweetness. This step is that of the perfect, who burns sweetly in God. For this sweet and delectable ardor is caused in them by the Holy Spirit by virtue of the union which they have with God. For this cause St. Gregory says concerning the apostles, that when the Holy Spirit came upon them visibly, they burned inwardly and sweetly through love. The 10th and last step of this secret ladder of love causes the soul to become wholly assimilated to God, because of the clear and immediate vision of God, which it then possesses. When it has ascended the 9 steps, it goes out from the flesh completely. These souls are few who reach this high state in life, but some have reached it, especially those whose virtue and spirit were to be diffused among their children. For God gives to founders, with respect to the first fruits of the Spirit, gifts and graces both in quantity and quality proportioned to the greater or lesser following which they are to have in their doctrine and spirituality. But speaking now of the common state of perfection, according to which all these persons become perfect, they go out from the flesh through this step of the ladder, because there are hardly any who live so perfectly in this life as not to go out from the flesh by means of some imperfection. But I believe that even if such souls go out by means of some small imperfection or ignorance, setting aside the first kind of imperfection, which belongs to venial sin, which means fapping, for perfect souls have, or sexual sin, for perfect souls have not these things habitually, though they be not exempt from them completely, as we have said, their exit is very sweet and delectable, more so than was their whole spiritual life in this world, for they go out amid the glorious encounters and impulses of love. Now, to draw towards the closing. This is a final stanza of the book, wherein is expounded a 3rd stanza. In this 3rd stanza, the soul sings of the happy chance which it had in journeying through this dark night with such signal success that none of the 3 enemies, the world, the devil, and the flesh, could hinder it. I should clarify, by the way, venial sin simply means abuse of sexuality. I was being a little reddity when I said fapping, but it means the it means specifically the misuse of sexuality for the misuse of it. Okay, and that doesn't necessarily, that can mean all kinds of things. The use of it for that other than unity and love. The use of sexuality for, let's say it this way, the use of sexuality for non-loving purposes. That's a better way to look at it. For the night lulled them to sleep and mortified them in the house of sensuality, so that they could not follow after it to impede its journey. Going forth then from itself, from things of sense and from temporal affections through this dark night of sense, and journeying by means of pure faith, which is also dark, the soul has come to kindle itself in love, that is, in the love of God. And not only has it succeeded in becoming enkindled, but it has become so enkindled and so passionate with love for God that it can be said to be transformed and made one with Him through love. For when the soul has been completely purged of all things that are contrary to the will of God, it becomes so closely united with God that, although it is not God by nature, it becomes God by participation, being as closely united and transformed as fire to fire. Such a soul lives more in the next life than in this, and in such a way that it can be said with great truth that its death is now life. Now, let us return to the stanzas of the soul, the poem, as I said that we would read at the end. It's the same poem we read at the beginning. Listen to it now with new understanding. On a dark night, kindled in love with yearnings, O happy chance, I went forth without being observed, my house being now at rest. In darkness and secure by the secret ladder, disguised, O happy chance, in darkness and in concealment, my house being now at rest. In the happy night, in secret, when none saw me, nor I beheld aught, without light or guide, save that which burned in my heart. This light guided me more surely than the light of noonday, to the place where he, who I knew who, was awaiting me, to the place where he, I knew who, was awaiting me, a place where none appeared. O night that guided me, O night more lovely than the dawn, O night that joined beloved with lover, lover transformed in the beloved. Upon my flowery breast, kept wholly for himself alone, there he stayed sleeping, and I caressed him, and the fanning of the cedars made a breeze. The breeze blew from the turret. As I parted his locks, with his gentle hand he wounded my neck and caused all my senses to be suspended. I remained, lost in oblivion. My face I reclined on the beloved. All ceased and I abandoned myself, leaving my cares forgotten among the lilies. Thus ends this contemplation on the sacred darkness that is actually light, the night that is more lovely than the dawn, the suffering that is secretly joy, and the death that is truly life. In meeting and integrating our spiritual darkness, we discover that what we thought was absence was actually the most intimate presence. What seemed like abandonment was the deepest embrace, and what felt like death was the beginning of true life in God. So, if I am to impress one thing upon you before I pull up the chat and look at questions, it is this: there is nothing more important and fulfilling in this life than the quest for God. Nothing. And everything else, to focus yourself on anything else, is idol worship. Now, the purpose of somebody like me is to remind people of this in hopefully as non-sectarian of a way as I can. And this is the approach of the Western esoteric tradition. The quest for God, whether it be through Christianity, Vedanta, Buddhism in its own way, Hermeticism, or simply your own way, as every soul remembers. Every soul, when questioned and prompted, does indeed remember its way home. And the quest for God is something that is lived out, not just in sacred ritual, prayer, and scripture, but through your life, and most importantly, through the hard parts of your life, the really hard parts. That's when God is closest of all, even though the obvious question that everyone asks is, how could God create a world like this? How could God do this to me? That's when God is closest, because that's when your soul is being purified. And what doesn't matter is being stripped away and replaced with that which does. And that is how souls are matured in this dimension we find ourselves in. And that is the meaning of life. And the issue is only that people get hung up on the symbols and the words in the Bible, the words in, this religion says this, or that religion says that. You have to look past all of that. God speaks in different ways to different people in different cultures in different times, and it couldn't be any other way. And beneath the symbols, there is unity. And the path is, broadly speaking, comparable and the same, because no matter who you are and where you're from or when you're from, you have a human soul. And human souls are constructed and unfold in a certain way, just like the human life cycle. The soul itself does have its own life cycle. Now, that life cycle may continue from life to life, but that's another question for another theological debate. So, especially at this time in the world, if there is one thing that I can impress on anyone is, by any other name, seek God. What is magic but God's way in the world? To truly explore magic is not to learn how to do magic, or to do magic, to do things, to do magic spells. It's to become a witness of God's way in the world. Magic is simply the action of God within the world, and if you pay attention, you'll see it all around you, all the time. Especially in the darkest and worst things, because that's when God is closest of all. And that's my message to you on the Autumn Equinox. All right, let's take questions, shall we? Super chats always appreciated, as they help the channel get more gear and keep going. And let me take let's take a look through the questions. Thank you, Benjamin. Much appreciated. Good to see you. And Alex, definitely need to read this book. It's a beautiful text. Thank you for this reading. You're welcome. Thank you for the super chat. It is excellent. Oh, I see a ton of deleted messages. Hope we didn't have trolls. Thank you, Temple. All right. Temple says, yes, the world is like this because of decisions humans make, not God. Yes. And occultology echoes that, saying, you made the world like that, God made it perfect. The more meditation you do, the more magic you do, the more you realize that everything is perfect. And everything is just as it is, and could not be any other way. And it is only our own perceptual filter, here we go, giving out all the secrets. It's only our own mind that makes it imperfect. Simply because the mind is forgetful of its true nature. Ron, yes, says eternal flame of Tifereth. It burns in the core of your being. Perfect. Yeah. So if you want to be technical about this, St. John of the Cross is actually not talking about Doth or the abyss, the crossing of the abyss, for those who know Kabbalah. He's talking about the veil of Peroketh, which separates Yesod from Tefereth. Tefereth representing Christ and Christ consciousness at the head of the cross of the elements at the bottom of the tree. Ben Bickney's quotes Hafiz, says, love sometimes wants to do us a great favor, hold this upside down and shake all the nonsense out. Yes, excellent. All right. Yes, Temple has posted the Discord link. Every stream we tell you to join the Discord. Come on in. The water's great. We have a very active and growing Discord community, which we love. Ron says, yes, the cities are not blessings. I see we have an experienced student here. Very good. Very true. Very true. And relates this to the Negredo Death's Head stage in alchemy. Yes, I see you know your stuff, Ron. Jason, if you stay on this track, it says publicly pwned, which is also a hilarious screen name. If you stay on this track, you're going to need to rent out a whole ass abandoned strip mall for your church. Can you imagine? It would be hilarious to rent out like an 80s mall, like the type you see in like the Vaporwave videos, like with like an abandoned Sam Goody in it and that type of thing. That would be fun. I saw on somebody somewhere had the idea that in the future that when millennials enter senior assisted living, senior facilities, they should just turn malls into senior citizen centers in the same way that sometimes if you go to like a senior citizen, like a nursing home, sometimes they have areas that are meant to set up to look like a town square or something. It'd just be like malls for millennial. All right. Occultology says, my magic group from a decade ago used to think I was a dark magician, mostly because I was the only one doing shadow work. Yes, well, this is what we talked about that a lot this weekend, because Temple Temple led a whole day of shadow work with people, which was very transformative and profound. So yeah, even with occult people, you find this fear of the dark. It's just people being afraid of their own shadow because they're unintegrated. And that's how to spot people who are not, the dark side of the light chasers. Alex named his cat Bina. That's great. That's great. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate your words. Thank you for being a dark light. I appreciate that, Rachel. Thank you very much for the super chat. It's always a great compliment. Perduraba, I shall endure to the end. Yes, indeed. Frauder, who's now been a member for 6 months, thank you, says, has it been that long? I think the dark night of the senses is Parokath, but the dark night of the spirit is the abyss, since the dark night of the soul is 2 nights. Okay, great, thank you. So a little bit of a technical elaboration by Frauder RC there. Okay. And, we should talk about this sometime. That's a great insight. I'd be fascinated to chat with you about that. Okay. All right, everyone. Yes, Ron says equilibrium is the basis of our work. Absolutely. Well said, Ron. I see you were also a frauder. Very good. First Church of Vaporwave, yeah. Chevy Wood says, hey, Jason, discovered from the Midnight Gospel and followed a few of your videos back in the day. Fell off a bit, but it's great to be back. Welcome back. Felt as though I was not ready, and honestly, after everything I've discovered, it's refreshing coming back to you with eyes more open. Thank you, I appreciate that. I mean, all that I'm doing, I'm explicating traditions that are already there. So the thing about, we can do our best to make it as clear as possible, but of course, the more experience you have, when you come back to it, things will mean more and more and more, right? And that definitely is true of, that's the most true of sacred texts like the one I just read, right? So, so welcome back, and that's beautiful. And keep going. I commend you. Keep going. It just gets better. Ron says it's like when one forges a sword, it takes intense heat and pressure to transform the iron into a tool of division. For I am divided for love's sake and the chance of union. Yes, it's all in the opening 5 minutes of perhaps the greatest spiritual movie ever made, Conan the Barbarian. If you haven't seen it, see that movie. It's a Nietzschean parable. All right. that's going to be it for me because I've been going hard for the last 3 days, and we were working on preparing a lecture, and I got to rest. But I'll be back on tomorrow. We're working on getting back. I know that I've been off. I haven't been doing 7:30, so we're working back on getting on a predictable, regular schedule. So thank you for your patience there as we were we're doing a lot here. Okay. All right, everyone. Lots of love. There will be more video game streams soon. So let me know if there's games you want to see, and I will see you tomorrow. Hang in there, everyone. Like and subscribe. Join the Discord.